Well, thanks, everybody. Chris used the language. You said Kevin's a champ. You know, I'm pretty sure my job description is a DS. I pretty much don't know what I'm doing most days, but I think that I'm supposed to like the pastors in our district. But you need to know, like, it's super easy to like Kevin Burney. He phones me. He's got a temperature of 104. Like, he's approaching death. And he's like the most cheerful guy on the phone and just optimistic. And I don't know if he's like that all the time. But every time I see Kevin, he's smiling. And I just feel better after being around him for a few minutes. And I hope he feels better. I was talking to the man, just how sickness makes its way through a home when you have small kids. So that's really cool. You're going to babysit for like all of Binbrook? That's really awesome. I think I might fly my young adult kids out here. Just you could watch over them too. That'd be really, really great. It's great driving here this morning. You know, I came a route I've never come before, and there's some new community called Thrive. I want to move to Thrive, you know, because sometimes I feel like I live in like barely get by, or you know, like, you know, to live in Thrive doesn't that just say you should all move to Thrive, whatever it is. And then there was this furniture store. And it's solid wood furniture. But it's not just called the Solid Wood Furniture Show. It's the Holy Cow Solid Wood Furniture Store. And like this, I wanted to turn in, but it was Sunday morning and it wasn't open and I was late. But it's funny how things can happen and people can put spins on things that unfold in our lives. I'm about to tell you something that will probably profoundly disappoint all the men in the room and probably half the women as well. You might even check out or walk out. But I had an experience this week that I had for the very first time in my life. I've never done this before. But this week, and this is pathetic, but this week, I caught my very first fish in my life. Let me tell you the story. I went fishing with another pastor, and I won't mention Steve Kerr's name because it's going to make him look a little bad. But I went fishing on the Bay of Quinte. I went ice fishing. Because if you're going to go fishing for the first time, go big and go. I actually had fish before, I just didn't catch any. But we went ice fishing, which really isn't an experience about fishing as much as it is about prayer. Because to go ice fishing in this weather, on like 4 inches of ice, really you're not worried about fishing, you're just worried about living. And so like I really spent the entire time. And then we're in this little hut, and this windstorm comes up. And I thought, like I'm in a tent, you know, in this little thing. It's just going to blow away down. We're going to end up in Kingston, I think. But anyways, we didn't. We made it back. But the fishing part. So like the pastor I won't mention, Steve Kerr, he has more fishing gear than like anybody in the whole world, I think. Like it's really not fishing. It's really unfair. It'd be like having Celine Dion come and do a concert, inviting people. Like, you know, everybody would show up. Steve's got so much equipment for fishing that every fish in the world is going to show up. It's just kind of what happens because he's got everything you could ever have to fish. It's not fair for the fish. It's quite unfair for them, I think. They have no chance. But, and by the way, the Martin brothers, Friday night, like the coolest thing ever. These guys can play and sing and inspire and bless and make you laugh. And boy, if you can be here Friday, bring some people. They're really, really remarkable. Anyways, a little commercial there. Thanks for that, Chris. So we're fishing. I've never caught a fish in my life. And so this is one of those good, better, best stories that ends up. So the good news is I went fishing. The better news is I caught a fish. But the best news is Steve Kerr caught a fish too. But I caught 5 fish. So I crushed him in the fishing department. That's the good, you know, better, best news. The bad news is that the fish that I caught was about this big. Like, really, it wasn't fishing, it was minnowing. Like, it was really unkind. Obviously, we released them, but it's like the small, I didn't know fish could be that small and still eat, or like catch, you know, put a hook in their mouth. Like, it was, so I sent the picture to my son, who loves fishing, is an avid fisherman, Told him that his dad had entered into the realm of being a fisherman now. And then I showed him the picture. It was fun. Anyways, why did I tell you all that? I know nothing about ice fishing. I know nothing about most elements of fishing. I did not know how to pull a hook out of a fish's mouth to release it. There's nothing about fishing that I knew, except I went with a guy who loves fishing, lives to fish. And he gave me all kinds of advice. He gave me all kinds of help. He gave me all kinds of encouragement. He gave me a fantastic example to follow. And so my day of fishing, storm included, was relatively successful because I was with someone that just knew how to fish and could show me how to fish. So fishing stories are one thing, but here's life stories. Life's not always simple. How many of us have been watching the news over the last few weeks with what's happening in southern Turkey and northern Syria? And your heart just utterly breaks for what these people have gone through and are going through. We hear stories, of people being rescued, which is amazing. But for every rescue, there's another 1,000 bodies that are found, it seems, who didn't survive the earthquake. But it's not just the news in Syria or the complexities of life here. It's our own life. It's your church. You got broken into. Seriously, who breaks into a church? Who steals stuff from a church? Who thinks this is a good idea? It's just so sad and frustrating. And we don't know what insurance is going to do or not going to do. And so, Kevin's week just got kind of hijacked because he's talking to police and he's talking to insurance and he's talking to people. And that happens to us all often. Kevin didn't want to get sick this week, but he did. We do. It just comes our way at times. But it's not even just that. Life's just challenging some days. Some of us are finding being married is really hard. And some could only wish that they could be married. Some are finding parenting to be incredibly difficult. Some could only wish that they could be parents. What young adult doesn't wonder, am I ever going to be able to buy my own house? Am I destined to live in my parents' basement for the rest of my life? And the parents are thinking, is our child destined to live in our basement for the rest of their lives? And there's just complexities, inflation, interest rates. There's just stuff that goes on, and how do we live? Francis Schaeffer was a theologian, philosopher, thinking kind of guy back when I was young, so a long time ago. Most of you would never have heard of him, but he wrote a book just talking about the complexities of life today. And the book he entitled, How Then Shall We Live? And I guess I just want to remind us today that, we live in this world that's complex. And we need someone to teach us. We need someone to guide us. We need somebody to give us truth that'll anchor us even when the storms come our way, when things happen that we don't want to have happen. And the amazing message of this book, the amazing message of this church is there is someone. I love what you say on your little card, helping people take their next steps toward Jesus. And that's a remarkable purpose as a church, to say this is what we are about, this is who we are, and this is what we're doing. And so I want to remind us that in the complexities of life, when stuff comes our way that we didn't expect, didn't want, didn't ask for, didn't deserve, how are we going to navigate it? Well, there's no better place to look than to look into this book. And that I love what N.T. Wright says about the Bible. I got to find this here. He writes, it's a big book full of big stories with big characters. They have big ideas and they make big mistakes. It's about God and greed and grace. It's about life and lust and laughter and loneliness. It's about birth, beginnings, and betrayals. It's about siblings, squabbles, and sex. It's about power and prayer and prison and passion. And then he says, and that's only Genesis. It's just a book that relates to our everyday life. It's a book that speaks to everything that we face all along the way. So when we try to figure out how we're supposed to live, there's no better place to look in this book. And there's no better focus than to focus on Jesus. So what I want to do today is I just want to take a look at a day in the life of Jesus. Because we're trying to help people take steps toward Jesus, and that includes not just the neighbors that are driving by oblivious to what's happening inside here today, but it's us. How do we live? How do we navigate the journey? What do we do with what happens? What comes our way when life gets complicated? And I want us to take a look at how Jesus faced a day and to see what we can draw from that. So it's in Mark chapter 1, second gospel in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark. You get to Luke and John, you've gone too far. And if you got a phone or with a Bible on it, or if you got a Bible with you, or if you just want to listen, let me just read a little bit of the text. So the story is that Jesus is in Capernaum. He's just beginning his public ministry. He's just starting to show up and do Jesus things. You know, that song that we sang, I'd never heard that before, you know, when he steps into the room and what takes place and when he comes and lives change is kind of the essence of what that was about. And that. So Jesus is healing people. He's setting people free from demons, people whose lives have been captured by demonic dark forces that are just controlling them. And it's really quite amazing. And it says that, that evening, I don't have my glasses with me, so I'm just going to fake it because, I don't know, Bible print keeps getting smaller and more unreadable, but the gist is people show up and Jesus is healing, delivering, and changing lives. And it says so much. I think it's in verse 33, but who knows, because the numbers are smaller than the letters. But somewhere like that verse, it says the whole town gathered at the door. We'll talk about that in a minute. So what does Jesus do? I mean, it's just, he's had this incredible day of ministry and intensity and that. And it says that very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, went to a solitary place, and he prayed. It just amazes me, that a day in the life of Jesus began with having conversations with the Father. A day in the life of Jesus began by talking to God about the things that were going on in his life. And the reality is that's what we need. The first thing I want to remind us of as we try to navigate life is that Jesus loved the quiet place. And we need to find the quiet place in our lives. Again, verse 33, everybody's at the door. Everybody wants a piece of Jesus. In the midst of all the demands, all the expectations, all the obligations, we find Jesus early trying to find a quiet place to be alone with the Father. I'm convinced that the fundamental ingredient, if you want to make sense of life, if you want to make sense of everything that goes on, everything that happens, is we turn to the Father. What did we do when we started church this morning? We worshiped. We tried to shift our focus from ourselves, from our day, from our sickness, from our losses, from our struggles, from our depression, from our whatever we're going through, and we tried to turn our eyes upon God to gain some perspective, to gain courage, to gain hope. That when Jesus is in the room, faith is strengthened. When we spend time alone with the Father, we gain perspective on what's going on in our lives, even the things that are really, really hard to understand. The things that make our heart ache, our head ache, our spirit struggle. We're given this opportunity. Jesus demonstrated for us that character is forged and commission in life is discovered in the quiet place. He demonstrated for us that strength, direction in life comes from being alone with the Father. Early in the morning, he withdraws. I don't think the issue here is time. The issue here is practice. And whether you're an early in the morning kind of person that wants to stop and spend time with God, or whether you're middle of the day, or whether you're a throughout the kind of day, or whether it's in the evening, the reality is that you and I desperately need to learn how to be still. We need to learn how to be quiet. We need to learn how to be alone with God. We need to learn how to hear God's whisper. So often, I miss the quiet place. I live an active life. I got a lot of things going on in my life. Several years ago, I'm probably ADD, probably should have been diagnosed. My kids are getting diagnosed now, and they're going, anybody in your family ADD? And they go, have you met our father? But several years ago, I was going to take a course. It was called Energy for Life or something. It was some course that cost like $2,500 to take. But the guy teaching it was a Christian guy, so he was making it available for pastors for like a quarter of that. And pastor's favorite word is free. Their second favorite word is cheap. So this was cheap. So we were going to go to it. And I was going to go, and I was all excited, look forward, cleared my schedule and that. And it's Tuesday, I'm at work, and the phone rings, and it's a friend from the church that's hosting this little gathering of pastors to figure out how to live life better. And she said, so you coming to the Energy for... I said, yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be awesome. And she goes, I said, look forward to seeing you tomorrow. She goes, Ian, it started today. And I went, what? And she goes, it started like an hour ago, and we're kind of missing you. And I said, okay, I'm on my way, and I canceled whatever I had booked for that day, and I'm driving from northwest Calgary to southeast Calgary, where the church was, and I just was having this, I don't remember one thing. Actually, the only thing I remember about the course is I look at you two right now. The only thing I remember about the course was he's saying, like, you had to drink 8 cups of water a day. So the question is, does coffee count as a glass of water? And then he goes, I get asked that every single time I teach this and that. And he says, I guess it does because it's 99% water. He said, but it's kind of like drinking polluted water. So enjoy your polluted water this morning as you participate with your Starbucks mug there. That's the only thing I remember about the course. And I don't drink coffee, so it wasn't a big deal. But anyways, another reason why you shouldn't respect me. He doesn't drink coffee? Seriously, who doesn't drink coffee? There you go. Thanks, Eugene. What I remember most is what happened to me as I drove down a freeway, probably slightly quicker than I should have. And I sat there and I thought, my life's out of control. My output levels are way up here. I've got aging parents that are fragile. I've got young adult children that are complicated. Trying to figure out how to stay married. I'm pastoring a church that's way over my head. There's stuff that's going on. There's staff stuff. I just sat there and I looked at my output level of life. Like everybody wanted a piece of me, I felt. And then I looked at how I was inputting my life. So I'm outputting here, but my input, because I wasn't sleeping well, I wasn't eating well, I wasn't exercising well, I wasn't as familiar with the quiet place as I should have been, and I just looked and I thought, I'm putting out at this level, but I'm inputting at this level. So how is it that I navigate this gap between input and output? How do I do that? And it occurred to me, I think it's the Holy Spirit speaking to me in driving down the freeway, that I've created an artificial source of energy to allow me to be able to output at a level despite my input. And that artificial source of energy is called stress. And stress allows me to function at a higher level. The adrenaline kicks in, whatever the physiology of stress is, I've never studied it. Stress is an artificial source of energy that allows me to function here, even though I'm only inputting here. But here's the deal. We know that we can't keep doing that. We know that at some point there's going to be a balancing of the books. There's going to be a reckoning. And so I thought, how long can I keep doing this? Another 15 years? Another 15 months? Another 15 minutes until something happens in my life where I have to pay a price for the withdrawals that I've been making with a bank account that wasn't sufficient. What would that withdrawal look like? Would it look like a heart attack? Would it look like some other physiological crash? Would it look like my wife saying, I'm done, I can't do this? Would my church say, you're out, we got to move on, we got to go in a different direction? And I remember thinking, what do I got to do? I need to probably reduce some of my output, and I need to increase some of my input so that I can get to a place where my input and output match, which is a place of thriving, to use the neighborhood's title. Today, what's your output? What's your input? Jesus taught us that in order to navigate everybody at the door, everybody wanting a piece of him, he needed to be alone with the Father, because that's where he found his strength, and that's where he found his perspective, and that's where he found his wisdom, and that's where he found the capacity to live the life that he lived. Most of us can't adjust our outputs. You can't just always drop your children off with the Bernies like you can one night later this month or whenever it is. Like, you can't just always do that. You can't just walk away from work when it's hard. You can't ignore a doctor's diagnosis. It's like, the red flashing light on your dashboard that tells you your oil is low, or, something else is you're overheating. You could take a piece of duct tape and cover it up. But you're just band-aiding the problem. You could get a hammer and smash the light so it doesn't flash in your face anymore. And you'll go, oh, that's great. But the problem is still the problem. How are we inputting? How are we pouring into our souls? What are we doing to build into our lives that we can be the men, the women that God wants us to be and live the life that he wants us to live? We need to be familiar with the quiet place. And I don't say this in any way to add another burden to your life. I remember listening to a guy, and I didn't know about this. He was talking, he was a little bit older. And he said, when I missed my quiet time for many, many years, I used to feel guilty. He said, now when I miss my quiet time, I feel cheated. That we would have such a love for God and such a desire to be alone with him, that if we somehow get caught up in a day where that time is gone, we wouldn't feel like, oh, geez, I'm a terrible person. We feel, oh, I missed out on such an incredible opportunity. That there would be that longing for the quiet place. That even after an incredibly busy season, Jesus early in the morning got up and went off to the quiet place where he prayed. The world that we live in is no friend of stillness. It's no friend of quietness. I saw a license plate, a personalized one, and it was INAHURRY. And I laughed, and I thought, you stole my license plate in a hurry. I feel like I'm always in a hurry. My fitness plan is usually running to my car to get to where I need to be to because I'm late. Oh, that we could learn to be still and slow down. Because here's the deal. All the great things in life you can't do in a hurry. You can't build an amazing marriage in a hurry. You can't raise really fantastic kids in a hurry. You can't grow a really cool church if you're always in a hurry. You can't build deep, meaningful, authentic friendships if you're in a hurry all the time. And church, we can't grow a deep walk with Jesus if we're always in a hurry. We need to learn to slow down. We live in an incredibly distracting world. And we are an unbelievably easily distractible people. It's learning to be alone with God that changes everything about everything. And let's see the second thing that it changes, because it's early in the morning. Jesus gets up, withdraws to the quiet place. And look what happens. Again, I'm going to fake it here. But the disciples, they're searching for him, trying to find him. I think, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I think in the original Greek, they were hunting him down. And then they said to him, what are you doing out here praying? Like, everybody's looking for you. Everybody wants to see you. So again, in the original language, I think what he was really saying was, why are you wasting time praying when there's really cool ministry that can happen, that could draw attention to us, to our cause? Because, Jesus, nothing validates things like numbers. All kinds of people want you. Why are you out here alone? Come on, let's get to it. Let's get on with the program. Let's do what matters the most. And what does Jesus say? Jesus said to him, actually, I'm not going back to Capernaum. There's other places for me to go. So it was in the quiet place. It was in a season of stillness that Jesus discovered the purposes of God for his life. And friends, I don't know most of you at all. I don't know what your story is. I don't know what your challenges are. I don't know what's on your plate. I don't know what your outputs are. But I know that if you're not inputting, you're going to live as a slave to the output rather than as a master. And Jesus didn't live as a slave to everybody else's agenda. He only wanted to do one thing, and that was to honor his Father. When we pray the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, we're really praying, Lord, may your will be done in our life, just like it is in heaven. May your will be my will. It was really, I always joke, I'm on a mission to change the name of the Lord's Prayer. Join with me. We're going to lose, but join with me. Because the Lord's Prayer is not the Lord's Prayer. It's the disciples' prayer. Jesus never prayed, forgive me, forgive those who trespass. Jesus never sinned. He didn't pray that prayer. That's the prayer he taught you and I to pray. Jesus' prayer, the real Lord's Prayer, not my will, but yours be done. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. That was Jesus' prayer. one of constantly surrendering himself to the Father. And one of the things that happen when we surrender ourselves to God, we gain a sense of direction as to how he wants to live, us to live our lives. And it's this profound invitation to us to allow him to be Lord and Master, the one who oversees all the details, all the outputs of our lives. So it's in the quiet place that we find strength, but it's also in the quiet place that we find direction and clarity and purpose. And we have an idea of what God wants us to do. For us to enter into our day with our Bible closed, gaining dust throughout the week, would just be remarkably tragic and foolish. And yet I try it all the time. And I think that my wisdom is sufficient for the day. And I often discover that my wisdom is incredibly inadequate for the challenges that come my way. And I find that my strength is completely lacking for the stuff that comes my way. And I find that my capacity is incredibly insufficient for the challenges that come my way. I used to have a sign on my wall years ago, and it said, "I can only please one person per day. Today is not your day." And then it said, "Tomorrow doesn't look good either." And, so many people have so much of an agenda for us. What is God's agenda? What's God's purpose? Jesus said, yeah, everybody's there in Capernaum, but I'm not going there. There's other villages for where I want to go right now. I was reflecting on this with my son the other day. My son is actually preaching this exact passage in Calgary in his church, which is kind of ironic. When I thought about last night, what should I do? I thought, I could do what Kyle's doing, because we were talking about it. And it's a passage that I love. But as I was reflecting, I thought, this is not just a text to teach. This is my life right now. My wife and I moved to Ontario a year and a half ago for a 2-year appointment to serve as a district superintendent of the district that Binbrook, the Well, is a part of. And it was a really, really difficult decision for us to realize that it's just going to be for 2 years. And so I will move home back to Calgary this summer. And here's the deal. For the first time in my life, I won't have a job. Now you look at me and go, well, you're old, so it's probably okay. But I'm not that old. For the first time in my life, I don't know what I'm going to do. August the 1st, when I finish here, July the 31st. Well, I know that I'll have to drive my truck across the country, but I don't know what's next. And I get a little concerned. I met with my financial planner yesterday. And he said, you're not going to be great, but you're going to be okay if I don't work again, because that's a distinct possibility. No, it isn't. I can't fathom not working again. But it is potentially a possibility. And it occurred to me that I need to hear the whisper of God as to what he wants me to do and where he wants me to go and what will come next. And the quiet space is something that I need to be really intimately connected to, because I need direction and I need wisdom and I need to know what God has for me next, because I think there's still something left. We've all been there, maybe not as dramatically as losing a job or changing a career or finding a new path, but we've all been in places where, Lord, what is it that you have for me? And it's in the quiet place that we often hear his voice. I don't want to get too close to Amanda because she probably still carries some of the Bernie plague, but if I was to talk to you right now, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So she can hear me, but you didn't hear me back there. Maybe you did because the microphone's on, but you didn't really hear me. Or if I turned the mic off, you for sure wouldn't hear me. Why could Amanda hear me? Because we're close. We're connected. Whereas Nick in the back is 15 yards away from me and couldn't hear the whisper. The scriptures tell us that when God speaks, it's often in a gentle whisper. And the only way we hear the gentle whisper is if we learn to be close. And if we learn to cultivate the quiet space and place so that we can hear his voice and we can discover his will. And then we come to the third part of this whole scenario that unfolds, is that Jesus not only knew about the quiet place and not only surrendered his life fully to the will of the Father. But along the journey, Jesus always touched the human condition. We know the story that as they're traveling to the nearby villages, they encounter a leprous man. And I don't know if you've ever met a leprous person or seen it on television or whatever, but it's an incredibly complicated reality. You were called untouchable. If you entered into town, if you were leprous, according to Leviticus, you had to shout out, unclean. Imagine walking down the main street of Benbrook, unclean, and everybody's going to the other side of the street as you walk down. You lived outside of the community. You weren't allowed to live. If you came to the synagogue, there was a chained off area at the back that they would let you come in, but you had to be far away from everybody else. It was the ultimate plague of the day. And there's a man who's leprous, who's feeling alone, no doubt well acquainted with his condition, no doubt eager to be cleansed, wondrously humble enough to ask Jesus to make a difference in his life. But there's not just the leprous man, there's the divine one, Jesus, and one whose life was marked by compassion. And we know in this account that when Jesus healed him, he went and he touched him. Did Jesus have to touch him to heal him? No, he could have sent him to see the priest. He said, go wash in this pool. He could have spit on him. I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which Jesus healed. But in this situation, Jesus touched him. He was well acquainted with the human condition. And he reached out in compassion and touched. And we live in a world that desperately needs the touch of God, the kindness of Jesus, the warmth of the Father in their life. Again, leprosy, a disease you didn't seek, rejected by those that you knew, avoided by people that you didn't know, condemned to a life of utter isolation and loneliness, trying to figure out a hope of anything ever getting better. Imagine the physical horror. Imagine the social isolation. Imagine the emotional scars. Imagine the spiritual loneliness. And then, imagine feeling the touch of Jesus. It's amazing. For the first time, rather than feeling rejection and isolation, he felt the touch of a person, the touch of leprosy. Church, there's all kinds of people that obviously don't have a physical expression of leprosy, but emotionally, spiritually, relationally, they feel isolated. They feel unseen. I was part of a missionary gathering in Indonesia last month, and we played a mixer game, getting to know each other. There's 100 people, 50 in the inner circle, 50 on the outside. And so you're standing across from one person. And the leader asked a question, you had to answer a question. And then you took a step this way, the middle of the circle stayed, you talked to this person, another question. It was a way to get to know each other. And so one of the questions they asked is, if you could have one superpower, what superpower would you like? So let me ask you that this morning. If you could have a superpower for a day, what superpower would you want? And the room went quiet. No right answer here. No wrong answer. What's that? Yeah, say it out loud. Yeah, sorry. You'd like to be omnipresent. Yeah, for sure. What else? Would you like to fly just for a day? The ability to fly. Super strength. I was singing the Spider-Man song to a young adult the other day, and they looked at me like, what? They'd never heard that song. It broke my heart. When I answered that question, I thought I gave a really, really cool answer. But I actually gave a really, really foolish answer. I said, I'd like the superpower of invisibility for a day, where nobody could see me, where nobody could ask me to do anything. And then I mostly thought, where I could hear what other people are talking about me. You know, we're always consumed with what other people are thinking about us. And then we grow up and realize they're actually not thinking about us. You know, it's kind of a shocking awareness. But I said I'd like this superpower of invisibility. And then I thought about it a little later, and I thought, that's just the stupidest thing you could say. Because you know what? There's a lot of people, even in this room this morning, who sometimes feel invisible. You feel like nobody notices you. You might have kids, you might have a spouse, you might have parents, but you feel invisible. Sometimes my wife feels that I don't notice her nearly as well as I ought to. And I'll go into the kitchen and grab something for myself and not bring her anything. And she'll go, hello, sitting here 4 feet away from you. And I get up, what can I get you? There's a lot of people that feel invisible. There's a lot of people that feel like nobody sees, nobody knows, nobody cares. And the message of the well, the message of this book, is that God wants every person to feel seen and valued and cared for. One of the most profound things that we can do along the journey of life is extend kindness and compassion to others. It's easy to be a jerk. It's not so easy to be kind. Kindness takes intentionality. I was talking with a friend of mine that works for Samaritan's Purse a couple of weeks ago. He called, not a week ago. And I said, what are you guys doing in Turkey and Syria right now? And he said, it's amazing, Ian. It's just amazing what happens. 2 days after the earthquake, Samaritan's Purse had loaded up a 747 with medical supplies, food, water, doctors, nurses, and a mobile army hospital. They arrived in Turkey on a Friday. And over the weekend, they built a hospital that had 2 surgical units, theaters, had an x-ray section, had an ICU, had 54 beds. They assembled it. They landed Friday afternoon. They had it assembled by Sunday night. And they were doing surgeries on Monday morning, caring for the tens and hundreds of thousands who are injured. That's what Christians do. Almost every disaster of the world, the first ones that are there are people who love the Father. Because when we love God, when we spend time with God, when we hear God, when we embrace God's purpose for our lives are marked by a profound sense of kindness and compassion toward others. So church, the will of God is that we become familiar at the quiet place, that we discover what the Father wants us to do with our lives, and that all along the way we extend kindness and compassion to whoever He brings across our paths at any given moment. We are called to extend the love and the kindness of Jesus all along the way. I went to visit a lady in the hospital a little while ago. She was a really dear friend, and she was dying. She was incredibly sick. She had more stuff wrong with her than you could ever imagine, and she was really quite young. And I was sitting beside her bed, and this African lady came in with her supper. And she was just full of joy and life and laughter. She just lit up the room when she walked in. And she said to my friend Shelley, she said, who's sitting with you here? Because her husband was in the corner and I was beside her bed. And she goes, this is my pastor. He's come to pray with me. And this woman goes, we always need a little more Jesus in the room. And I thought to myself, when I enter the room, do I reflect Jesus to those that are in the room? The doctor came in. It was a Saturday. It wasn't her regular physician. It was an on-call doctor. And he grabbed, at the end of the bed, they got a chart, and so he grabs the chart just to, what's he dealing with here? And it's pages. It's like this thick. He's kind of going through it. And you can just see the look on his face, like, man, this lady's sick. And then he looks at Shelley. So he's like here. Shelley's there. He's at the end of the bed. You're Shelley. And he looks at her and he goes, and he gets a smile on his face and he goes, this does not match this, the smile on her face and the look of peace flowing out of her soul. He goes, this does not, how do you look like that when you're dealing with this? And she looks at him, smiles warmly, and she says, oh, I've met a man. And he looks at her husband in the corner. She goes, not him. He's great, but not him. I've met a man named Jesus. And he's changed my life. Have you met a man this morning who's changing your life, who's teaching us how to live even in the midst of the chaos that sometimes seems to surround us? One last story. It's a little bit about my dad, and it's a little bit about a friend of mine. The friend's name is Dave. Dave was 34 years old, and his body was filled with cancer. The cancer had taken about 120 pounds off his 6'4" frame. He was dying. He had weeks, maybe days to live. He had 2 small children. I met him when I dedicated his second son. And shortly thereafter, his wife called and said, Dave's in the hospital. He's really sick. They don't know what's going on. It doesn't look good. I said, look, can I see him? She goes, go, please, that'd be great. And I went and we prayed. I don't know what I said. I don't know what I did. I'm not even sure what I prayed. And the word came back, and it was the worst news you could get. It was stage 4 bowel cancer. And they said, we don't think it's operable. We're going to try stuff, but we don't think there's anything we can do. And I used to visit Dave once a week, and he just became one of my dearest friends. I was in the room when he died. It's the first time. And the only time, other than when my mother died last year, where I was in the room when somebody died. And I'm a pretty caring pastor who visits the hospital a lot. People said Ian would sit in the emergency room waiting for people to come. Anyways. Dave somehow came to church. He hadn't been in church in weeks. He's got a feeding tube through his nose. That's the only way he can get food, nutrition into his body. He looked gaunt. He looked terrible. And he walks in. He's got a cane. He's 34 years old. And I went to him and hugged him, and I said, I'm so glad to see it. He said, Ian, I woke up today, and I just knew that I needed to worship Jesus today in church. And so he made his way into the service. I don't know what happened in church, but whatever happened, happened. Came out after, him and his wife, Darcy, and we're in the middle of the foyer. Darcy goes, I gotta get the boys from Sunday school. So she heads off. I take Dave, because the kid's tired. And there's a chair on the side of the church. My dad, there's 2. My dad's in one, and there's an empty seat. Now, my dad's been practicing social distancing for decades, like far before COVID happened. My dad is very kind. He's very warm. He's very thoughtful. He's quite hilarious. He's the perfect gentleman. But he's quite content. My mother goes to church so she could stand in the middle of the foyer and tell everybody she was my mother, where my dad just kind of is always on the periphery, on the edge. So he's on the edge. And Dave's got to sit. So I go, hey, Dave, come sit over here. And I go, hey, Dad, my friend Dave. Dave, this is my father, Sandy. And I'm thinking, how's this going to go? Because Dave's real sick, and he's pretty weak, and he's not overly, social these days. My dad, Mr. Social Distance dude. But I watch, and they're just having this conversation like 2 old best friends I met, and Darcy comes up with the boys, the kids, and she goes, who's he talking to? And I go, it's my dad. I go, my dad doesn't talk to people. This is amazing. So anyways, at the end of it all, Darcy and I walk over, and both Sandy and Dave struggle to stand up because they're frail. And my dad takes Dave's hand, and he holds on to it. My dad's not an affectionate person. Holds on to his hand, and he said, David, it's quite obvious to me that you are in a very, very significant physical battle and challenge. Dave nods, and he goes, but, he said, there is a wellness of soul that exudes from your life, and it's been my privilege to meet you today. It's the most profound thing I've ever heard my father say. And he's a profound dude. And I ask the question of us all, because I ask it of myself all the time. Is there a sense of wellness of soul that flows out of my life that others notice? Wellness of soul happens when we learn to be alone with the Father. Wellness of soul happens when we learn to follow the Father's plan for our lives. Wellness of soul happens when we're passionate about extending kindness and compassion to all God brings across our path in any given moment. How then shall we live? Learn about the quiet place. Embrace the Father's will. Be kind at every turn. And life becomes amazing, and we get to help people take steps toward Jesus. The will of God for our lives this day, all day, and every day. Let me pray. Lord, teach us, a bunch of ADD people a bunch of distractible people, to learn to be still and quiet. Teach us in a world filled with agendas, all kinds of voices screaming for our attention and our allegiance, to hear only your voice and to embrace your path. And teach us in a world that says more for me is better for me, to learn how to be kind and compassionate in profound ways. Because that's just what the people of God do, and it's how they live. Where we're not kind, where we're distracted, where we're too busy, help us to learn from Jesus. Help us to live like Jesus lived. Fill us with your Spirit so we can pull it off. We commit ourselves to this as we commit ourselves to you. We bless you and we love you. We need you and we trust you. And we tell you it all in the powerful name of the one who taught us how to live well.